Welcome to SwitchCorner, my name is Alex. Today we're taking a look at White Day, A Labyrinth Named School on the Nintendo Switch, and this one, it's a horror title that released originally back in 2001. This re-release, so it dropped on other platforms a few years back now, but how does it play and is it gonna be worth your cash? Well, hit subscribe, join us here for reviews and deals near daily, and let's get started. Before we do get started, then if you are considering grabbing this or anything else from the eShop, consider using cornershop.gg for discounted eShop credit with instant email delivery. You'll get 10% off at checkout using a code CORNER. Story then under this one, it's set in South Korea on the eve of White Day, essentially think Valentine's Day. We'll be taking on the role of a newly transferred student who sneaks into our high school at night. The reason we noticed our crush dropped her diary, she was heading to this location, we wanted to not only return that diary but some chocolates as well. Things though, they quickly escalate. Not only do we meet a large cast of characters that are up to, let's say, no good, but eventually they do become trapped as well. What ensues is a horror journey through this location, filled with some sinister history, more than a few ghosts, and a couple of janitors that are an absolute pain. This is my first time with the game, but I really enjoyed the narrative. It packs multiple endings. These are going to be dependent on decisions made and areas completed. That also includes then dialogue responses as well. This game as well clearly heavily influenced the Coma series. I'm a big fan of that, but yeah, in idea it feels very similar, so that's definitely a good thing. Gameplay then under this one, a first-person horror exploration title. There's no weapons in here. This is very much about stealth gameplay and brain power as you solve more than a few puzzles. The most frequent threat in here has to be the janitors, and not the nicest of guys, honestly. They walk around with baseball bats ready to beat you to a pulp. Now, I played this one on normal difficulty, which displays an eye at the top of the screen notifying your distance to a janitor and whether you've been spotted. The game does pack though 5 difficulty options, from very easy to what is called hell. This impacts everything from the game giving you tips to removing ghosts, to increasing the number of ghosts, to janitors, and finally, you guessed it, an absolute nightmare of a challenge. Controls are simple. We can move, sprint, we do have stamina, but it's very generous. We can interact, we can duck. Early on as well, we'll get access to a lighter to explore without turning on lights and alerting anyone around us. We'll also find plenty of items to leverage through this night. The controls, gotta say, definitely clunky at times. No matter how much I messed with sensitivity options, could never quite get it to feel right, and it becomes a little frustrating at points towards the end game when you'll often encounter janitors and you'll need to sprint and pick up an item at the same time. I could never quite get the targeting to where I needed it to be. I basically needed to create more distance between me and my enemy, kind of counter the controller issues. It is really going to be a whole lot of sneaking though on the normal and above difficulty, observing patrol paths and then occasionally running and hiding. Sometimes this could be as simple as behind a desk, others a bit more, let's say, substantial, like a bathroom stall, which full on actually locks you in place. They're definitely not the smartest, the janitors, on normal difficulty, but I also would say don't underestimate them, which I did a few times. Outside of the janitors then, we do get the ghosts. These play into a collectathon style of menu where it details all of the ghosts you encountered. Some are purely for narrative purposes, others are willing to briefly attack. They never proved too threatening outside of one in a room that was particularly troublesome, as she did teleport all over the shop and actually had me locked in the location. Then, on the back of Ghosts, the scares, I know it was considered one of the scariest at the time, and now I do think some 21 years later, it's lost some of its edge. The janitors are relatively slow paced once you get used to them, the ghosts rarely impact too much, and then the locations, it's kind of a pretty standard school, so I wouldn't describe it as too creepy outside of maybe a few occasions. I think the main issue here is it's somewhat repetitive in its scares. The janitors are the same too, slightly different speeds. Ghosts are mostly brief encounters, and then there's a few jump scares as well. It got me the first couple of times, but then it kept on doing the same one over and over, a ghost in a locker as I opened it, and I actually got to the point where I came to expect it. Then the puzzles, they occasionally get what I'd call a little too obscure, with puzzles that require maybe a little too much from you. I did have to search for a couple of solutions online, but all in the game it took me right around 9 hours, and I did get stuck on more than a few occasions. Mainly the puzzles I found challenging were those with symbols, but there's some real highlights as well. Two favourites would be changing clocks in the third new building, and then also a pool puzzle, which is particularly intense and had me absolutely stressed out. That's very much towards the end game. Many of them as well will require multiple steps, including collecting up items, keys which unlock progression, and a multitude of other, let's say, interconnected actions. The puzzles, though, they're often solved in this one with notes that are scattered throughout the world. They also often continue to build a big part of the story. On that note then, items, they do play a big part overall as well, from more story-based pieces to, let's say, healing items. These can also, the healing ones, be purchased at vending machines if you can find a coin. It's also worth noting, look for black markers. These are used to save the game at specific locations. It does pack an autosave in here, but it's only until you quit. If you quit out of the game, it's going to be back to that last, let's say, hard save point that you manually put in place, so please do be aware of that. I actually lost about 20 to 30 minutes of progress for this reason. Other problems too then, very few honestly. My only complaint would be the autosave, great addition, but little indication to where they will take place, and on occasion they would actually save me right next to a janitor. This nearly resulted in me trapped in a death loop towards the end game, but I fortunately was able to get out of it after what was like 10 attempts. Save frequently basically. I had to suffer through this moment as I'd made a good, let's say, hour or so of progress that I wasn't willing to give up. That's pretty much everything outside of some costume options in the main menu for each of our characters, including the always classy bikini and lifeguard options. Graphically then, I was really impressed. The original released in 2001, this build, it's based around the 2015 release. It was on the PS4 and Steam, I believe. But yeah, it's just a nice clean image. We get a high resolution and the frame rate throughout is absolutely solid. Really enjoyed then some of the ghost designs as well. There's a couple that are a little, let's say, too cartoonish for me to be scary at times, but overall they move in some dramatic ways, a nice variety, and each feels unique. The only issues I would note with visuals, you'll essentially traverse 3 school buildings, and the first 2 feel identical, the third is slightly modernized with different textures, but yes, still little changes. The other note, animations on our lead are a little stiff, and that's a reflection of the times of the original release, where it's more, you know, a case of this port is basically texture work and nothing else. Audio finally, and it's mostly good. The music is particularly atmospheric. I really enjoyed the voice acting, somewhat cheesy in English, but it actually suits the game's style. And the background effects were my favourite bit. Lots of simple effects that build something that can be nerve-wracking, like ghosts or voices or janitors that whistle as they kind of patrol their path. The game, though, it uses sound as a mechanic for you to leverage, which I really appreciate. The only complaint here from me, occasionally, some of the recording quality, it can feel a little low and like flat in its quality. So the final verdict on White Day is a game I've intended to play now for a long time. I'm glad I finally got around to it. While it's definitely showing its age in some areas, from animation to scare tactics, couldn't help but be hooked by its surprisingly deep narrative. Just really well done, and it balances its basic story with a ton of information to be found around this world. It just makes the exploration extremely rewarding. You want to actively get out there and find more. The autosave issue was concerning, honestly, but I do think for horror fans it is going to be well worth a look. While I do suspect as well that it's lost its edge on the scare front of the, over the years, the story is just so good that it's getting a recommendation from me today and a good 7 out of 10. Horror fans then, will you be picking this one up or holding onto that cash? Let me know in the comments down below. Then hit subscribe, join us here for reviews and deals near daily, and I'll see you all on the next video. Thanks everyone.